Next speaker, guys, the man, the myth, the legend, the architect of the 21 Convention. I'm sure you guys have heard of him before. His name is Anthony Johnson. He is a dear friend of mine. It's amazing what he's put together. None of you guys would be here if it weren't for him, obviously. None of these amazing speakers would be here if it weren't for him. And he's really, as he says, and it's funny that he said this a few days ago, or yesterday, I think, but I always thought it. I thought he's like a, what are you, 23? 23-year-old trapped in a 50-year-old's body. Or, sorry, a 50-year-old mind trapped in a 23-year-old's body. So he certainly doesn't look like he's 50 years old, but he's wise. He does have a cane, so, you know, he's in. But this man is wise beyond his years. He's put together some just amazing resources and communities, including this event, including his new blog, Declarationism.com. That's your new blog, correct? As well as the Dream Lounge, founder and CEO of the 21 Convention, and just a kick-ass guy. I can't wait to hear his speech. I know it's going to rock my world. Same with you guys. Let's hear it for Anthony Johnson. Need help there, old man?
I got it. Thank you. Thank you, Robbie. Hey, guys. Hey, yeah. Cheers. This is one of the pocket copies I have of the Declaration of Independence. I'm sure all of you are familiar with this. For longer than anyone in this room has been alive, this document has been just thrown out the window. I would have torn it, by the way, had I had the strength right now. But for longer than anyone here has been alive, and longer than your parents have been alive, and your grandparents, that document in particular, independent of the Constitution and of everything else you know in this world, it has been just chucked out the window, I want to say intellectually violently, in a way. And this presentation, in a sense, will be a small step forward towards restoration of that document. The title of this presentation is Declarationism, the only fully consistent political legal philosophy in American history. It could also be titled The Truth About Politics and Law in the United States of America, plural. Preface and a warning. You can read that up top. This will be extremely polarizing and controversial, but by necessity. There is no intent to injure. I have no malicious intent to offend anyone, but there's a high chance you will be by the very nature of the presentation. So if you are easily offended, you should buckle your seatbelt. The reason for this is that it's going to conflict very directly with most or all of your political convictions, assuming you have them, assuming that you have meaningful interest in politics as it is commonly understood today. And it's going to conflict with anything in your mind intellectually that you have associated with politics. That could be a pretty wide range of things. Before we actually get into the topic of declarationism and the concept, I'm going to ask you guys, probably for the first time in your life, to stop being open-minded, as it's commonly understood, which would mean to be open to everything, just blanket everything. At the same time, I will ask you to stop being closed-minded, as it's commonly understood, which is just blanket closed to anything and everything. Instead, like most of you here already are, but just to verify, I will ask and I will need you guys to start being extremely active-minded to the highest and best of your ability possible. When I say active-minded instead of open or closed-minded, which are common terms in this, used in this little paradigm, I mean actually thinking, actively thinking, and judging fact from fiction every step of the way. So not skeptical, but highly critical, and you're chewing as chewing on the ideas I'm going to present to you as fast as you efficiently can and to the best of your ability. So you're not kind of skipping over things. You're just thinking as hard and as fast as you can on what I'm saying without losing track of the presentation as it's proceeding. The reason I mention this specifically is because declarationism is a political legal philosophy. It's a combination of politics and of legal philosophy. What I mean when I say that, relevant to this, is that it's a very long conceptual chain to reach these conclusions, much more than you are used to or perhaps you have ever even encountered. So if you can think of ideas as being on a chain, like a barbell, like a chain link, like if you had handcuffs or something, for example, it's a lot. It's way more than you're used to, even with the ideas you've been presented with here, which similarly are on very long conceptual chains, idea chains, with exercise, with nutrition, with health, with philosophy, with ethics, with self-interest, with intimate relationships, with dating, with confidence, and so on. These things are also very advanced. This is even further so you have to think really hard and pretty quick. So what is declarationism? In a very introductory and a very simple sense at the moment. Declarationism is at present a minimally explored political legal philosophy. It is not a term in wide circulation, much like libertarian back, I believe, in the 60s, before the party was founded. It is a political legal philosophy I've chosen to take, this works better, a political legal philosophy I've chosen to take command of, personally. It is simultaneously old and in its infancy at the same time, not implying a contradiction, but applying two different contexts to the term. Because as you might have guessed, declarationism has to do with Declaration of Independence, which I threw off the stage beginning of this presentation, which has been around since 1776. So it is old in that sense, but in its infancy because it is I've been developing it further for about 2 years now, since I came to the conclusions and then discovered the term. So it is still in its infancy. It's still in the very early beta or developmental stages. Some early definitions I'll provide to you that will not be on the screen. Some very simple definitions from other sources, not related to me in any way. The first definition is from the Maryland Law Review, Volume 71, Issue 1. Declarationism is the view that the Constitution can only be understood and interpreted in light of the principles enunciated in the opening words of the Declaration of Independence, which are held to be the Constitution's beating heart and unshakable foundation. Another short definition from a source, not me, it's from Wikipedia, unknown author. Declarationism is a legal philosophy that incorporates the United States Declaration of Independence into the body of case law on level with the United States Constitution. Further, from this same entry. Proponents claim that the concept is derived from the philosophical structure contained in the Declaration of Independence, an assertion that it was the Declaration that created the nation, the Constitution creating only the federal government. According to this view, the authority to create the Constitution derives from the prior act of nation creation accomplished by the Declaration, which you guys actually heard verbatim from, I believe, Yaron Brook and or Eric Daniels at this very conference. The Declaration declares that the people have a right to alter or abolish any government once it becomes destructive of their natural rights. The turn away from the Articles of Confederation, the first operating document of this country, with the ratification of the Constitution was an action of this sort, or demonstration. And so the Constitution's authority exists within the legal framework established by the Declaration. The Constitution cannot then be interpreted as though it were the foundation of constitutional law, in the absence of principles derived from the Declaration. The principles of unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is actually the most well-known phrase in the English language. Declarationism defined. This is a definition that I've devised. It is not permanent as of yet, but it's a little more explicit than what you just heard. A political legal philosophy that correctly identifies the federal United States Constitution, united, not capitalized intentionally, as it was presented in the Declaration of Independence, as the supreme law, and simultaneously identifies the United States Declaration of Independence and the unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness it legally asserts as legal foundation and ultimate filter for all legal political action in our Union of States. The Union of States being our country, America as it's commonly called, our country. A derivative primary concept that needs to be understood based on what I just presented to you guys is the floating abstraction, which is the entire global landscape currently in our country, political legal landscape of our country at present. A floating abstraction is very well demonstrated in this image. It's a house that's floating in midair as if magically suspended there. There's nothing actually supporting it, holding it up, or more importantly, connecting it to reality or the ground. It is an idea and a concept that exists independent of reality, so it has no real alignment or connection to reality. It's not grounded, so to speak. The same way your feet are grounded on the ground when you stand. The same way any idea must be grounded in reality to be a fact, to be valid. As it stands, the Constitution is, as it's practiced, is a floating abstraction in the absence of the Declaration being its filter. It is a document, an operating document of law that has just zero connection to reality. It's a document, as it's practiced, of unlimited law, as we'll get into, which is, in a sense, lawlessness. It's no law at all. If a law is unlimited, it's nothing. It is because of this floating abstraction, as you see in this image, that today we live with what are accurately identified as illegal laws, which are contradictions with no legal authority. In truth, the law is not whatever you, anywhere else, anyone else, or everyone else, or any number of people wants, wishes, whims, or votes it to be. The Constitution does not have unlimited authority and can only be modified in ways that are in explicit accordance with the Declaration. Another primary concept deriving from Declarationism are the unalienable rights asserted in the Declaration of Independence. I know this is going to seem a little redundant, but it's necessary for the presentation and for the idea and to understand it. Unalienable rights are unalienable rights. Undelegatable rights are undelegatable rights. To delegate is to alienate. We can conclude from this that unalienable is equivalent to undelegatable. Undelegatable being a flavor or variation of alienation. It's a derivative concept. You could, for example, a little bit of a strange analogy, but if you had a piece of paper that was a right, you could also tear the paper or tear the right. To delegate a right is much the same. You are, if the paper were somehow invulnerable or unalienable in this case. So to delegate is just a form of alienation. And if you're wondering as well, a lot of you are probably aware of the concept of a violation of rights, your rights being violated somehow. For example, a criminal mugging you in the street with a gun. It's a violation of your right to your life, to your property, potentially to your pursuit of happiness if you were to incur serious bodily injury, and so on. You might think for a second that if a right can be violated, it is in fact alienable, but this is not true. To violate is not to alienate. To violate is actually a lot more like suppression. Like if your rights were this table and I were to push down on them very, very hard, that would be a violation. This has some pretty serious, these concepts you're seeing here, especially that unalienable. If a right is unalienable, it is undelegatable, have some pretty serious implications that a lot of you probably aren't aware of yet, but you will be momentarily. Most people are not, for that matter. Before moving on, it's important to note that undelegatable or unalienable rights fundamentally, permanently, and irreversibly trump illegal laws, which I'll discuss in a moment and provide examples of. Application 1, or the first slide of application for declarationism, based on some of the ideas you just had presented to you, which were very simple, or at least I try to make them as simple as possible. This will be the first application of what these things mean as applied in concept. Declarationism is a complete rejection of opinion, preference, economics, and pragmatism from the political legal equation as determining factors for devising and operating government. What this means is not necessarily a rejection of your specific opinions on government, on politics, and on what you prefer. It's a rejection of the very concept. So it has nothing directly to do with you. It's a lot more fundamental. The same way that, this is a serious question. Who in here can tell me what 2 plus 2 equals? 4. Follow-up question. Who in here likes the idea that 2 plus 2 equals 4? Like, is actively, likes, when they see it on a chalkboard at school, they're like, oh, I love it. Who likes this, or even in inverse, who dislikes it? Who sees a simple math equation and has any kind of, you have no disfavor or favor of it. It just is what it is. In essence, this is what declarationism accomplishes. It removes preference and opinion from the equation of how you actually determine how to run a government. So it's not subject to anyone's particular opinion or favor or preferences. This is specifically because politics, in reality and in truth, are not matters of opinion or preference. The degree of preference and opinion that actually goes into politics is almost non-existent. It only pertains to elected officials and organizational structures that are basically, they're just matters of preference. Whether or not, for example, taxes can be violently enforced is not a matter of opinion, it's a matter of life and death. Because the end result of that opinion, so to speak, applied, is someone having a gun in their face, which is an immediate confrontation of life and death. There is no, for example, in between. There's no such thing as a living dead. There's no such thing as a zombie like you see in Hollywood. It's actually why the concept is fascinating to us, for the record. Moving on, a further application of this. I mentioned a moment ago illegal laws, which is probably a term you're not very familiar with. There are some authors that have mentioned it, that have discussed it before. But to provide just some basic examples of what an illegal law is in the umbrella of declarationism as a political legal philosophy, I'm going to provide some just terms that everyone here should be very familiar with. Economic policies is a contradiction. It is a contradiction the same way a square circle is a contradiction. You can conceptualize it, you can write the terms square circle on a paper, but they have no actual expression in reality other than the concept and you manifesting the concept in just writing or language. So in reality, there's no such thing as a square circle. It just does not exist. You can pair the words together, but they just have no meaning. Right now, there's a presidential race going on, so economic policy, or policies that each president wants, not presumptive nominee wants, is a hot topic. But I can tell you definitively that there's no such thing, legally. An economic policy implies that somehow politics and economics can be combined, when in fact they're like oil and water. They're 100% antagonistic to each other, and each one has no place in the other. They not only have nothing to do with each other, they diametrically oppose each other. As Greg Swan said on his blog, a speaker at this conference not long ago, the concept or the term free market is actually redundant. There's no such thing as an unfree market. It would cease to be a market at that point. It would be violence or political action entering the equation of a marketplace, which has nothing to do with a market. It is the exact opposite of a market. It is me and an attendee here, you and I, trying to exchange value for value, and someone interjecting with a gun in some variation, in some form, whether it be a criminal with a gun or a police officer with a gun. No matter what their justifications are, as long as you and I aren't hurting anyone else or violating anyone else's rights, no one has the authority under any pretense to actually enter into the agreement you and I want to make. If I want to sell you, for example, a ticket to this conference, you have a right to buy it if I have a right to sell, if I'm choosing to sell it to you. If this makes sense. So economic policies, as it's discussed day in and day out in this country, is actually a term that it's as meaningful as a square circle. Gun laws are another one, which should not be confused. A lot of people that are persuaded to be like left or liberal leaning, they want to extrapolate this out to include like nuclear weapons, which is a completely different topic. But any kind of firearm, any kind of gun, you have a right to own it the same way you have a right to own any other type of property, from a laser pointer to a cane to a shoe to a boat to a car, etc. So for someone to create a law that in some way violently restricts your right to own that particular piece of property, it's a nonsensical term. There's no legal foundation in reality for anyone at any point under any pretense to create a law for a normal, healthy human being. So let's assume you haven't, for example, you haven't been convicted by trial and jury and due process of like violent crimes. So assuming you're a normal, healthy human being and you have not, this is the majority of the population by a long shot, there's no such thing as a gun law that's actually legal. If that makes sense. The very idea is antithetical to reality. It has no connection to reality. It's another square circle. Another one that should be pretty easy to grasp is kind of like I just talked about free markets. That term is redundant. On the inverse, when people say taxes, the term is not specific enough. It does not, by tradition and history, taxes have included violence, but tradition and history do not dictate the law. In reality, violently enforced tax is illegal. No one has the authority to violently take money from you under any reason or pretense for whatever they want to, however they want to justify it. There is no valid justification for doing that at any point. So it would be legal to have a voluntary tax, a tax that you pay to the government for a specific service like Social Security, but for someone to force you to pay that is another square circle. It doesn't exist, whether it's Social Security tax or income tax or property tax or sales tax. See, unlike today, most of you should know this, but if you don't pay Social Security tax, you don't lose Social Security. You have to pay it, or your employer has to pay it. There is not like an option here. It's not a service that you pay. It's a violently enforced tax. The same as with income tax. You don't lose access to something by not paying it. You have an IRS agent or sheriff or police officer at your house eventually there to haul you up to court and jail. And if you resist, they'll kill you. This is not optional. So these are contradictions that should be easy to understand, that are, at least in the sense that they're very obvious to us today. They're practiced very consistently. The third application, or slide of application, would be discussing practicing declarationism. You might be wondering if declarationism is something that you need to advocate, or not that you shouldn't argue for it or defend it, but it's something new that needs to be kind of injected or interjected into the political legal landscape, and this is not true. Declarationism already exists. It has existed since 1776. No new laws are needed. It's the last thing we need. Very few actually need to be removed. An example would be income tax. Assuming it was properly ratified, which there is a little bit of controversy about, the 16th Amendment. Income tax is not inherently evil, unlike or contrary to all of the kind of abrasion against it, especially recently. The problem with income tax, like any other tax, is the fact that it's violently enforced. Again, assuming it was properly coded into the legal system in the first place, or on the level of the Constitution. So no one, for example, would be up in arms or angry today about income tax, or probably any tax for that matter, if it was not violently enforced, if you didn't eventually have a gun in your face, if you didn't pay it. So that's what I mean when I say that few need to be removed. Is as horrible and horrendous as some laws are, like Obamacare, the new healthcare law and all that, was a really big deal recently. This isn't something that necessarily needs to be repealed. That's not really the problem. The problem is that they were able to bring this into the even discussion in the first place under the assumption of enforcing it through violence, the individual mandate as it's called, or anything else for that matter. For example, telling an insurance company, a company that's no different from any other company, what they're going to charge, how they're going to charge for it, and what services they're going to provide. Again, politics and economics have no place. They're like oil and water. They have nothing to do with each other. And when they mix, it's a clash. It's a conflict. They repel each other. They have to remain separate. The primary need for declarationism is an intellectual revolution in fundamental legal philosophy, not some kind of march on Washington or even a moral revolution that I think we've already had. No one in here, for example, believes it's at least explicitly believes it's moral to hurt people, to shoot people down with a gun, or to hit them across the face with a cane or a baseball bat and so on. At least this level of violence to us is very obviously immoral in most cases. So really what's needed is an intellectual revolution in fundamental legal philosophy. Legal philosophy, or at least the law, being almost the last vestige of what people perceive to be objective. They tend to deviate very consistently away from subjectivity in the law. The law being the law of reality, so to speak, not the law of men. The law of men being an euphemism for being ruled by a dictator or a tyrant or a king or some kind of communist regime, and so on. So does that make sense? I'm not really advocating some kind of march or anything like that explicitly or implicitly in this. It has to be an idea. The idea has to take hold at the fundamental level in people's minds. And they have to recognize what already exists. Declarationism, or the Declaration of Independence, and the unalienable rights it asserts. You might also be wondering at this point, why declarationism? Why am I up here even talking about it? What is the purpose of this? I haven't really given you that yet. I've just been kind of throwing ideas at you. The Declaration is the most profound document in human history. This country is the greatest in human history, in spite of what you may have heard to the contrary. It is, in fact, the only moral nation in the history of the world. Both are worth saving, and if one is lost completely, I believe both are lost instantaneously. And that would mean back to ground zero. That would be a reversal of the past 200-something odd years that have been like the most explosive in human history in terms of growth and progress and advancement of the mind and rights and happiness and quality of life and so on. Taking a small step back, when I say that the Declaration is the most profound document in human history, I mean it. There's actually a really good quote I came across the other day that expresses this very clearly. It's paraphrasing a quote from Ayn Rand, who's a philosopher, novelist philosopher you've heard a lot about at this conference this year. The quote, again, this is a paraphrase, "If it could ever be proper for man to kneel to anything, it is the Declaration of Independence that he should kneel to." As you may have noticed here at the bottom as well, I'll put in parentheses that the concept of unalienable rights is hanging by a thread. I believe the concept of unalienable rights, as it was presented at the founding of the country and the Declaration of Independence, is actually and truly the idea that's been really holding the country together and kind of keeping us from slipping into complete tyranny, as good and as nice as we apparently and seemingly have it at this point. The quality of life most of us enjoy in this room is very, very high. We enjoy, even to this day, a lot of freedom in spite of all the nonsense going on. And if you really want to find out what's responsible for that, at least in an idea, at the level of ideas, it's the concept of unalienable rights. I'm not going to summarize the presentation necessarily, because I'm going to take a lot of questions in a moment, if you guys have them. But before we get into that, I do want to discuss some common criticisms or refutations that people who have an interest in politics might immediately think of. The first is that reality cannot be that convenient. Could the Declaration really be superior to the Constitution? Could the Constitution not ever have the authority to grant the federal government or any government between the states the authority to enact violence against you when you haven't committed violence against anyone else first or violated anyone's rights? Could it really be just that good? Could we have it that good? Do we not even need any new laws? Do we need only repeal a handful? My answer is, of course it is. What else would you expect? When 1 + 1 = 2, and you understand that, it's not a surprise. Maybe as a child it was, but as you age pretty quickly, it became very apparent to you. And why is this? This is because 1 has a value of 1. The second one in the equation has a value of 1. When you put the 2 together, it equals 2. The 2 together. This is very obvious, and it is very convenient, so to speak. But you shouldn't really expect anything else. Of course, no government, and I realize how broad sweeping this statement is and the depth of it might be kind of shocking, but of course no government can ever claim the authority on your life. Unalienable rights are undelegatable. They can't be delegated. No matter what, you can't as I'll discuss in a second, you can't volunteer for slavery. There's no such thing as a volunteer slave. It doesn't exist, like a square circle. So yes, reality is that convenient. I realize this might be a bit of a shock, but there are no contradictions in reality. If the chair you were sitting in is the chair you were sitting in, unalienable rights are unalienable, and by direct consequence, undelegatable. So no, the government does not have a right to your life. You have a right to your life. That doesn't change. It can't change. They can be violated. But like I discussed, when someone violates your rights, or hurts you, or threatens to hurt you, or defrauds you, which is a derivative of violence, it's a suppression. It's like me pushing down on this table. And if I happen to be, for example, a criminal, I put a gun to your head and kill you and take your money, that would be the manifestation of me pushing so hard on this table that it broke. So the right never actually leaves you, as I discussed earlier. An unalienable right, no matter what, is an unalienable right. It doesn't change, no matter what happens. It doesn't go anywhere. When you die, it still doesn't leave you. It just disappears because you die. The second common refutation or criticism of this immediately for most people, if they have an interest in politics, and if they happen to believe that's true for some reason, which it's not, is the concept of social contract in a very fundamental and antagonistic sense to unalienable rights. So I'm not saying that human beings are not social animals that essentially need and should work together. Need in the sense that it is extremely beneficial, not absolutely necessary. So social contract, the idea that people are somehow enslaved to each other just by birth. Not only can you not volunteer for slavery, see undelegatable rights, your parents can't volunteer you for slavery before you're born. Their parents could not volunteer them before them, and so on down the line. So there's no point, since human beings have been human beings, that anyone has been able to volunteer in some social contract nonsense of signing without signing a contract, that you're somehow a slave and that this somehow really truly contradicts Declarationism. It's certainly the concept conflicts with it, but social contract is just nonsense. If you have further interest in that topic, I would recommend also the works of Lysander Spooner, who was the guy who created the first post office in this country, who was abruptly shut down by the government when it was nationalized into the post office that you know today. I'm actually going to end the presentation with one more slide I had as a bonus. This might further concretize the concept in your mind and what it really means. A civilized society is a free society. A free society is a declarationist society. A moral society is a declarationist society. It is not amoral, the philosophy itself. It is based on the morality, on objective morality. And finally, a free society is a moral society. These things are all interchangeable. Any deviations from this produces a society that is, and human relationships that are, uncivilized, savaged, slave-based, immoral, and disconnected from reality, much like the house I showed you guys was floating with no connection, literally, to the earth, to reality. When I say slave-based too, I realize that's maybe a strange term to some of you. What I mean by that is that slave-based means that in ways that are usually not obvious, today at least, the methods are difficult to observe on the perceptual level, what you can sense and what you can see without having to really think about it. They are more abstract, less easy to detect, and more sophisticated, especially when malicious. And they're a lot more advanced. So in some senses today, people have been enslaved. Someone here earlier mentioned debt slavery or financial slavery. This is a form of slavery. Being indebted to, especially student loans are a really good example of like a very malicious kind of debt that has been kind of combined with government. I don't believe they're legal in the first place, but more than that, they've been almost like a trap for people, young people that are very unaware of what's going on and completely unaware of special privileges that have been granted to all student loans, whether or not they're even directly funded by the government. They're really bizarre. So there are a lot of different variations of slavery. They're not just the shackle slavery or institutionalized slavery that you were taught as a child in the early years of this country. So when people think slavery, they think very binary. I don't want to use black and white because people are very confused in the term, but they think someone's shackled, and if they don't have a shackle on them, then they're free. That's not true. There are a lot of different forms of slavery. And as I discussed, any deviations from what's kind of going on up here, it does result in that, in addition to the society being uncivilized, savage, slave-based, immoral, and disconnected from reality. And on a final note, there is no real gap between a society being civilized and it being free. It's only civilized to the degree that it's free. It's only moral to the degree that it's free, and so on. the gap or the dichotomy between these things is false. In the words of Ayn Rand again, this kind of dichotomy is lethal. Although she never explicitly said that about this dichotomy. I believe she would, if asked. I do have a final slide, but I'll keep that secret for now. Guys, that's been the bulk of the presentation. I hope that this very brief introduction and crash course on declarationism has been insightful. It's been very difficult to produce, not only because I've only been really consciously aware of the philosophy for about 2 years now, but it's, as I discussed, it's a political legal philosophy, so it's very, very long conceptual chain to really come to these conclusions, which I came to on my own before finding declarationism itself in its primitive form. It's very difficult to do. You have to really think. You have to really be watching every step you take in your head as you go. But I believe the presentation and what I just presented to you guys is true. I believe the Declaration of Independence is the supreme law, the supreme legal foundation in this country. The Constitution has no authority without the Declaration. And unalienable rights are undelegatable. There's no way around this. This is not, you're entitled to your own opinions, but not to your own facts. This is a law of identity. If 1 equals 1, if A equals A, this is true. And the implications of this are, as you might kind of come to on your own after this presentation throughout the day and the weeks and the months to come, they're pretty far-reaching. If violently enforced tax is legal across the board, the degree and the scope and the frequency to which the law truly is violated on a daily basis is almost unimaginable. With that said, I thank you for participating, for taking part, for answering a few questions, and for listening to what I have to say. That is a crash course in declarationism. Thank you. We'll take a few questions if you guys have some. Keep in mind as well, this is in the developmental stages, so it's possible you could stump me, but probably not. It's probably not going to happen, but try. If you can, that's pretty awesome. I'll give you a DVD or something.
Looking forward to the DVD. The question that I had to do with the ratification of the Declaration and then, by extension, the ratification of the Constitution. So if we look at both of those documents, they're ratified by the states, correct?
True. It should actually, the Constitution should probably say we the states. But I think we the people was actually added later, before it was finalized.
Right. So keeping that concept in mind and going along with what you said about a person cannot, or a parent cannot sign a child into a contract, by that extension, a state cannot sign an individual into a contract.
True.
So basically, as soon as you're
born...
born...
No, they cannot violate unalienable rights. So a social contract, in terms of it somehow inducing slavery, that's false. A parent can sign you for some sort of contract when you're in the womb or somehow, but it not in any way that can violate your rights. So it has to be some sort of preference, something that's not actually pertaining to the fundamentals of reality of rights of your life. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So you can make a contract and you can delegate rights, so to speak, through a contract. Contract rights are not nonsense. You just can't contract out unalienable rights. That's what I really wanted to say. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay. So yeah, contracts exist. They just they can't include things that are like your life, your liberty, your pursuit of happiness. Which, by the way, those 3 rights, they're actually, if you've ever noticed it, they're actually listed in an order, each one deriving from the former. So you cannot, for example, live free unless you're alive. You cannot pursue happiness unless you're able to live free. And of course, you're alive in the first place. Interesting little tidbit that's pretty simple, but a lot of people don't think about. I think he had a question, or him? Or? Okay, yeah, shoot.
My question was, well, like if certain laws come up in the future or now, how do you protect your natural rights if they're coming after you?
You mean in violence? Yeah. It's a tough question, man. I think, and this is where actually, I don't disagree with Ayn Rand on a whole lot, but this is a place where I disagree, even though it's not very obvious that I disagree. She was an advocate of gun rights, so to speak, and of property rights, and of self-defense. But she never stressed, I believe, an accurate degree of importance on owning a gun, on an individual owning a gun, and firearms, and knowing how to use them. I think guns are very interesting technology because they empower an individual human being who is capable of using them and aware and trained at least to a basic degree. They empower him so much to defend his life. The degree is unprecedented. Unlike a sword, a person who's well trained, for example, with a gun can really defend himself from a lot of different people. It sort of levels the playing field between an individual and groups of people who are practicing democracy in a way that is disgusting, which would be like a lynch mob, voting to come take your money or to kill you. If you were black, even as recently as 40 years ago, I think in Fort Myers, where I live, 1976. So yeah, guns are probably the best way. I know it sounds really radical, probably because it is, but I mean on a very individual level. So owning one, and then if you can, knowing other people. The hope is that you would never have to use it, of course, against someone who's coming after you with a gun and with a badge on. But it's how this country was founded. Most people they seem very uncomfortable with the idea that this country was founded on retaliatory violence, so defense, secession, and treason against the British Empire. So these terms are usually very negatively associated, but as I saw recently, quote, George Washington didn't use his right to free speech to defeat the British, he used a gun. So ideally, of course, you'd always want to, and I have zero hope that that would ever happen. Violence is always a last resort for a rational person. It is the absolute last thing you do. This country, they avoided it as long as when it was founded. The Congress avoided it, the Continental Congress, as long and as far as they could until it became absolutely necessary. Just like in self-defense, you don't pull a gun out and shoot someone who looks threatening. You would only do it when it becomes imminent, serious bodily injury, or your life becomes in danger. Does that make sense? Does that help?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
So Ayn Rand never stressed the super importance of guns. I think she should have, and I think that was a mistake not to do. Doug has a question?
I want you to extrapolate a little further for someone that has been volunteered into slavery.
You mean like someone in the military?
No, me.
Oh, you. Oh, a doctor. Oh, sorry.
I've been volunteered into slavery.
Yeah,
so
I'm aware.
Where?
No. I said I'm very aware.
You're aware. Okay, great.
Yes, 100%.
So
I find it very
it's a little bit more
matter.
problematic because my lost opportunity cost of 20 plus years of education is what's being leveraged against me when I've been volunteered into slavery. By the same token, I agree with you on gun possession and self-defense against one's own government. However, if your talk here suddenly gets 500,000 YouTube clips, you're going to have a drone dedicated to you.
Maybe.
Do you think Breitbart really just dropped dead of a heart attack?
Who?
Andrew Breitbart.
Oh, this name sounds familiar. I'm sorry, I'm very oblivious to this.
Libertarian blogger was going to come out with video that was very...
This was recent.
Yes.
Yes, I did see this.
Dropped dead in Brentwood on the sidewalk at age 42 or 43. But anyway, all that aside...
Yeah.
He wasn't paleo, though, was he?
Yeah. All that aside, I think that notion kind of falls apart once you get in the crosshairs. Once you start becoming an activist, getting out there and put yourself in the crosshairs, or if you just have a huge investment in where you are already and that's being leveraged against you, your virtue is being used against you to enslave you.
Yes.
I want you to comment on rational self-defense versus, under that circumstance, whether it's better just to take a low profile and hide.
Yeah, like Greg Swan. You missed that presentation yesterday, but Greg Swan had a great forward phrase. His phrase, not that I'm particularly recommending it to you as an individual, but Greg Swan's comment was, or one of his favorite phrases, I guess, is, "Fuck you, I quit." Kind of like shrugging, Atlas Shrug style. Not that I'm specifically advocating that. So I sense two questions. One is kind of the activism aspect. I didn't mention this because I really tried to shorten the speech up because it was running way too long when I rehearsed yesterday, like a half hour too long. Declarationism is not really isn't really, like I mentioned actually in here, an advocation of activism. In fact, I think one of the greatest attributes of this political legal philosophy is that, I mean, I might be talking out of my ass here, but I think it will fly so low under the radar that by the time it catches on, it'll kind of happen instantaneously. It'll happen not overnight, but pretty damn quick. And in the process of that happening, that's my envisioning of it, that it would overturn things so fast, just like the American Revolution. It took the course of a few years, and it was done. This was a nation. That's really what I would aim to have this do. Not through violence, ideally. Obviously, I don't advocate that, unless and until it's absolutely necessary for the defense of your life. But as far as the philosophy itself, I think, yeah, it'll fly under the radar. It won't go, people will just dismiss this as a fringe. This is like, you know, if you have libertarianism, which is off the chart, completely off the radar of everybody, no one cares. You then have like anarchism and voluntarism and like even objectivist political philosophy. All that stuff is just so far off the mainstream they no one even sees it. This is even further. This is like such a derivative, not a derivative, but I think it'll remain so small to the point that it really catches critical mass. Probably just rambling on here. As far as, yeah. And that's almost by design. I realized that pretty early on, that it would just be dismissed for so long that truly and hopefully it would just fly under the radar. Yeah. As far as being an emergency.
I mean, Greg's right, and Greg is right.
Yeah.
And those 4 words go through my head every day I go to work.
Yeah.
It's a contemplation. It's a day-by-day decision. But eventually it's going to happen. And for you guys, and I'll be talking about this later today, it's going to happen en masse.
Yeah, I believe it.
It's going to be a really weird scenario. But
I'd like to answer
it's a delicate break point. And I say those words in my head every day, and I fantasize about it. So,
what the 5-second explanation of what Doug's just getting at here is that he's an emergency room doctor. You're going to hear him speak later today. I believe if he doesn't treat someone who is injured coming into the hospital when he's on his ER shift, he faces like a $50,000 fine, I think imprisonment potentially, the destruction basically of his family and his life, and for all we know, the confiscation of his property. So basically the destruction of everything he's ever worked for in his life could happen if he doesn't submit to being forced to take care of someone, not because someone comes in with that money and he wants to charitably treat them, but because he has a conceptual gun to his head that as a doctor at that hospital on his shift, if he doesn't do it, his life will more or less be over. He'll end up in jail in a cage like an animal, fined $50,000. If he doesn't pay it, I believe it would probably be violently enforced, and so on. So doctors in that sense, ER doctors at least, if not more, have been enslaved, so to speak. It's a form of slavery like I was talking about. It's pretty disturbing, it's disgusting, and I hate it as much as people talk about it being civilized for people to get treated in this country no matter what. That's not true, because Doug's not our slave. Doug is a free person, an individual. He has rights of his own. If he wants to treat someone when they come into the hospital without money or insurance or whatever to pay for it, that's up to him to choose. That's how it used to be in this country. I think Ron Paul talks a lot about that when he was a very young doctor back in the 50s and 60s. They had charitable hospitals, and people didn't have money. They would treat them like 99% of the time. Today, that doesn't happen. Those hospitals are all gone. All those doctors and those practices more or less are gone. And now Doug is one of probably the last bastion of doctors who are still there and who haven't quit, because that practice is truly disturbing and it's abhorrent and savage, that he is forced to treat people with a gun. I know for a fact that if I were injured where he lives and I went to his hospital, I would rather die, and I say this with all seriousness, than see him forced to treat me with a gun to his head, whether it's there in person or it's waiting at his house with his family, with his life, with his property, with everything he has ever worked for in his life. It's up to him to treat me if I have no money, not us voting or somehow arriving at the conclusion, the false conclusion, that it's somehow effective or practical or civilized to do that. It's disgusting. Slavery is savage. It is inhuman. It's undignified, no matter what. You can't argue for it. Slavery is bad, period. Next question. Hope that answers it? Yeah.
A little bit off of what Doug said, and you have a wide range of speakers who are espousing different philosophies on how to be involved or not be involved. Mm-hmm. So the question I have for you, and I'm interested in your answer, is you have someone like this doctor who is getting that feeling of wanting to quit. Mm-hmm. And then you have other people who are very involved, which are enforcing that. Yeah. So they're not quitting. So where is the balance with declarationism that you end with the result of him not being forced to do that? Isn't there somewhere in there where that involvement and the actual quitting is going to be the opposite of what really he's wanting? Did I answer the question well?
I think you mean ask it. I'm not
ask it. I apologize.
Following exactly.
Where does declaration fit in the balance of quitting and over-involvement making someone voluntary slavery?
Oh, you mean like, for example, a sheriff being forced to arrest Doug for not treating someone?
No, your philosophy. You know, where do we leave with this philosophy as far as the balance between quitting, saying screw it?
When's it time to say fuck you, I quit?
Yeah, when is it time to say F you, I quit?
Okay.
And when is it, you know, where does that fit in with the balance of the extreme of quitting and the extreme of complete involvement?
Yeah, bad results. Declarationism itself is a political legal philosophy. It doesn't directly deal in this. This is more of like a psychological thing, or it's like a different science almost. But as it relates to it, there's something I didn't mention for Doug that I should have mentioned, or anyone in his position, or in the opposite position. For example, a law enforcement officer who's aware of this, and who is then ordered by his superior to arrest Doug or serve him a fine, or bring him to jail under the threat of violence, or a courthouse, and so on. And I think it's counter economics is actually a really good solution that would fit into this in a distant way. Counter economics would be avoiding the state at every turn of the government, basically. Where they're going wrong. The government isn't always bad. It's just when they violate your unalienable rights are they bad. So counter economics is like Doug, in some fashion, or any ER doctor for that matter, or anyone else in his position, really avoiding taking part in what's going on as often as possible. Doug's an ER doctor, so I don't know if he can work at outside of a hospital, but I think I saw a while back Ron Paul talking about, for example, doctors who work for cash only now. And not only that, but only do house calls. So I don't know exactly what they're doing with their taxes, but they're probably really avoiding a ton. By avoiding insurance, they're avoiding the fascist insurance kind of conglomerate going on right now, and has been going on for a long time. So that's an example. If Doug, for example, was a different kind of doctor and he could do that, that'd be a really good way for him to just say, fuck it, I quit, but continue using his medical license and so on. Not that he should need one, actually, to practice medicine. A license is like a violently enforced certification. It's not just a certification from a university that you and I trust. I recently had surgery. I trust my surgeon, whether or not he has a license from the government. I'm more interested in his credentials of where he went to school and his reputation, as I'm able to derive it from people.
Right. What you speak about, people are doing. There's a family practice doctor in my own town that's opened up a cash-only practice, has opted out of Medicare, Medicaid, and accepts no third-party insurance. And without that administrative burden and bureaucratic overhead, an office visit is $35.
Yeah.
So once you do that, the costs of providing care go way, way down. The problem is I foresee relatively quickly under the ACA, what everyone calls Obamacare, that's going to be pretty quickly outlawed, because that will be a huge escape valve that will make how the whole system is structured implode. And I see that going away. And the problem is, to do that requires some brick and mortar investment that is not insignificant. And if you embark upon that now, there's a very good chance that that will be outlawed, and you won't be able to pay down those debts through your own productivity, and that's kind of intimidating to do. So
a solution might be, this is always the the gleaming, beaming hope. The internet might be really useful in kind of combating this, even though it really sucks to have to combat it in the first place. The internet and keeping things anonymous and using all kinds of softwares and programs to really keep yourself anonymous. You could conceivably use websites and services to, like Craigslist is almost like a black market. I mean, everything goes down in cash every day.
Such thing as a black market. A black market
True. This is true.
Announce the market.
Yes.
Craigslist is a free market, and a free market is
redundant.
as you said
Right.
earlier.
A black market, I mean in the sense that it's commonly understood. I do agree with you, but just as kind of the language, even with me, see, it's subconsciously kind of ingrained in us. This is how we speak.
Owns your brain.
Yes.
Right.
This
But I
is
think I
100%
can
true.
kind of get at I think I understand his question in terms of activism. And the problem with that is you have to be careful about whose premise you're accepting.
Yeah.
When you're talking about activism and getting people involved to change things and make appeal to the populace at large, the premise you're accepting is that you're going to be operating within the system that is enslaving you.
Yep.
And that's the real difference. Like, we can't rally people together and get involved and try to educate the public and try to enforce our vision through the same force that their vision is being foisted upon us.
Yeah.
So it really is an individual system, an individual action that you have to take when you do declarationism. But the catch with it is without that activism and organizing and, community organizer kind of approach, it catches fire spontaneously. And that spontaneous organization is how that perpetuates itself.
An answer to this, in a sense, even though it wasn't directly a question, and I'll try to end it on this. I think I'm out of time. I believe, and I'm in the sense that I'm convinced it is true, that if you have absolutely the right idea, you absolutely have reality on your side in a way that you will eventually and inevitably win. I believe this is why the United States, why we won the war, so to speak, against Britain. There's a lot of different factors, of course. If you look at history, people will argue all these different things. But this is truly, I believe, why we won, is the reality was truly on our side. Even if the odds were against us, and it was the greatest military threat in history at that point that we had to face as not even a nation yet at that point, or barely a nation, I believe if you have absolutely the right idea that you will win. I believe this is why Ayn Rand never succeeded in limiting government, as the pamphlets you see there, they say, the fight to limit government. She never explored legal philosophy. She specifically stayed away from it. There's quotes that I know I've read that she said, I don't want to get into it. I'm not a legal scholar. I'm not a historian, and so on. So she took capitalism and she developed it, freedom essentially, but she never concretized it or applied it into the law. So it was never quite finished. I believe this is an extension of objectivism, of specifically political objectivism in the political sense, the political aspects of it. This is essentially the cherry on top, or the finishing touch. This is what makes it real. This is what makes it succeed, because it was missing this. You had morality on your side, but not the law. So then you had to advocate morality like they do today, and then economics, the pragmatic argument that it's most effective, which undermines both the legal argument and the moral argument. If something's the law absolutely and definitively and cannot be changed and is morally true and objective, why would you ever argue that it's the most effective? Of course it's going to be most effective. Nothing else is even possible. The idea that morality and practicality are ever at odds is, I believe, truly nonsense. It's a lethal dichotomy, as she called it. That's one of her favorite words, I believe. At least as I have read her work. So the two are never at odds. And this is an extension on that. This is that philosophy now applied in physical reality, into everyday life. I believe I'm out of time? No?
I'd just like to end that I applaud your journey.
Thank you.
You know where I stand as far as the younger generations and what's going on in our world, and whatever that journey many or all of the people here take, I think it's a journey that needs to be explored just as much as the journey of how to go approach a woman. And
Absolutely.
in some ways has as much value or can round you out as the ideal man as anything else that's been taught. I applaud your journey.
Thank you.